Good morning, everyone. It's Joker, and today we are back with another slime video. And it is time, finally, to update the tier list to May of 2024. This means we are adding the Exalted Champions meta, plus their skill fusions, and, the other relevant units that came with it. But first, few things to take note of is that I did change the icons a bit. I have replaced all the old ones that were like the really close face-ups with the in-game assets, so this should make it at least a little bit easier for people to tell which unit is which. Obviously, you still kind of have to know what you're looking at to begin with, but I mean, it's a lot better to look at, this full trainee instead of this trainee, or like this Shizu is going to look a lot better than, her, well, that version won't, but I think this will make it a little bit more clear. So we've got the skill fusion units next to their counterparts if they're in the same level. If not, then they're just kind of spaced out. I do have a few changes to make though. On top of this is one, we're gonna drop Light Leon down to situational because he very much is situational at this point. You're not going to use him very often. I know a lot of light units always come out, but man, when's the last time you used light goddamn Leon? And secondly, I know I was going to drop somebody else down. Actually, I also added the starting skill point tier. So how we had the big three with the starting protection gauge, I've also added the separate tier for starting skill points. So Milim, Lumi, Soe, and Rimuru will occupy this slot. I think that but all four of them really can be in between these two. Rimuru might be a stretch a bit. Her skill fusion, where did I put her? I put her down in the C, because there are just not many times you need such a gigantic heal. But, her trait is good. Soe and his skill fusion is up into A tier, which I'm heavily contemplating moving Rimuru and Soe up into S tier, because they are really good. And while Shizu is up here because she's really good in Valor Cup, I don't really use her other places. Soe is really good in almost every Jubilee normal fight at this point that you need to, take less damage. And Space Rimuru still has a competitive support buff. So I think I am going to put all three of them up into S tier, because they are really good. For situational things, yes, and in those situations, they are really, really good. And I think that's the only other change I have to make. Lumi's skill fusion is up into A tier. Space Milim we have yet to rank because she just got one. And then, Soe and Rimuru have already been placed. But, so that's it for any changes of existing stuff. Let's start off with the easy ones, and we'll go from there. Okay, so free-to-play battle unit, we have Veldora. I actually do like this Veldora quite a bit. He has another limited orb change, just like Diablo, just like Nabe, just like Misery. But because his other skill is not limited to, any one team, and it's just a standard green buff and a magic resistance down, so it's doing two things that are very good, generically across the board. I would consider him quite a bit better than these two. I'm going to put him up into A tier. I don't think he's quite generic enough on every team to put him up in the S tier, but he's certainly a very, very good A tier free-to-play unit, because he is going to benefit himself. He's going to benefit a lot of other teams that are running green orbs. So I like him. I hope they trend more in his direction than I'd say Diablo's direction, where you can only use him on a Primal Demon team, or New Year's team, or Misery only to be used on Primal Demons. I want some versatility out of these free-to-play units. So Veldora definitely does give us that, for the most part. Alright, next we have the Protector units. We have brand new Velzard, who is fantastic, so we don't even need to talk about it. She goes up to Godly tier. I mean, passively giving you 30 skill points, 50% all element buff across the board with no restriction whatsoever, and the Drago effect also with no restriction means that your 50% element buff is 60%, and any other normal buff you put on a unit is immediately enhanced, which makes her tippity top tier for any burst team at this point that you need a green orb for. I mean, Velzard is, Vengeance. Idle Rimuru gives you the invincibility with specific units. Shion is orange focused. Rimuru from the Overlord collab is stacking green, and then Velzard is burst green. So she definitely deserves to be up in godly tier. Free-to-play Kigali, I just got done with her showcase, and she's not terrible. She is still pretty limited, because she's only giving Schemers and Exalted Champions that element buff, but the orb changing and the 20 skill points are for free, and they have no restrictions. So overall, her kit to get maximum output is still limited, but I still think she's decent, and she's better than these ones down here by all means. So I don't think she's as good as Vengeance Albus, because Vengeance and Chloe can still make people invincible, so she's not quite up to that level of free-to-play protector. But I still think she's an okay option for newer players, nonetheless. And now we come to the battle units. Let's get the skill fusions out of the way first. Dark Veldora, situational at best. He's got, actually, what's his other skill? I don't remember his other skill. His skill fusion, actually, is his 60% ult damage and 20 or 10% pierce power, or pierce resistance down, and that got upgraded to 70%. So it's definitely a good skill. You kind of need the pierce to go along with it. And then his other skill is crit damage. Okay, well, is what it is. So yeah, it's only going up to 70%. This 10% is still there. So, I mean, he is still fairly situational. You do need to get a pierce team for him to really stand out as a supporting character. But 70% plus pierce resistance down is better than straight 70%. I believe it's also better than 80% straight up. So he could move him up into B tier, because a lot of teams focus on Pierce, right? There's a lot of Pierce units now, so I think we will put him up into B tier. We'll give him an upgrade, because at this point he does match an 80%, an 80% alt buffer, which is pretty standard now, unless they're personal buffs and it's like 100, like this new Milim. So he's better. He's definitely better. Dark Milim, man, I'm not entirely sure what they were attempting to do with her, but I'm not a terribly big fan of it, because, you know, it turns the crit resistance and crit rate to all allies crit resistance and all allies pierce resistance. So they turned her into a pure defensive character. I have yet to really use her, because I don't really find myself needing this, especially if you have Vengeance Raphael, then she becomes actually null and void. So I'm not a super big fan. I can see on paper her value for what she's attempting to do, but I don't know if it's really worth it. But because she is one of the big three, and, you know, she's a heavy dupe target character, you know, getting her skill fused would make her helpful in some scenarios where you're dying because the boss does too much crit or too much pierce, which for early game, you know, Ifrit does a lot of crit. So yeah, can be helpful is where we'll put her with her skill fusion. Yeah, that could be give or take. I might actually have to skill fuse her and really take her around. But I mean, just from what I've seen and what I've looked at, I'm not too impressed. Space Milim, though, we do have her skill fuse, though, and she still remains she is actually the best non-EX single-target nuking character. So, with that said, she's also now up in the starting skill point tier, which gives her a lot of value, and if you're going to dupe her up for that, then you might as well give her the extra element buff, and then she'll be your best non-EX nuking character in the game. Now, does that deserve to go up into A tier? Because with all these other EX characters, that, I don't know. Because her personal buffs, you know, 50% space, 30% magic, 20% attack plus Drago, is a lot for one character to be doing by herself. With all those buffs, does she output the same amount of damage as, you know, Space Blanc? I don't know. Blanc's ceiling is a lot higher, but Milim is an old character, and you probably might have dupes for her. So you know what? I am going to put her up in the A tier, because she can still put out a very good amount of damage for a 2-year-old unit now. Literally 2 years old. She came out for the original half anniversary in 2022. So I think they gave her a pretty decent upgrade, and her kit was already pretty good to begin with, and they just made it that much better. Now let's get to the new battle characters. Milim. She's gonna fall into A tier, and that is purely because she is a single target DPS, and she brings no support viability to any other team except herself. And we know that if you only support yourself, you are going to get lost in translation in like 2 months' time, right? All of these, single target DPS characters, Milim, Shinsha, Ainz, like even these characters have some support level buffs to other people, but they're still not very good. Milim has a very good damaging skill for herself, and then a stupid gimmick, which honestly, for like high level Jubilee, is not even used. Not even used. Her back-to-back EX-ult is unnecessary, because if you're not in Jubilee, where they have infinite health bars, if you are properly nuking with her, they're gonna die in the first shot. And then you don't need the second shot, unless you are a very, very new player and your gear is not great, which apparently, with all things considered, people are. But we're not going to use that skill in another Jubilee, right? Once this Jubilee's out, she's out too. And then we need her maybe to single target a Jubilee normal stage, of which you don't need a back-to-back ult, because you only need a 1 ult on turn 3. You don't want to go 1 ult on turn 3 and 1 ult on turn 4. That's not going to get you max score. So she falls into that category of you are useful now and never again. So unfortunate, but true. Guy, I think, is actually pretty good, mainly because we're always going to get more primal demons at this point, because with the release of Blanc and Jean, and they're probably going to force them down our throats. Violet always gets new characters. Guy always gets new characters. I mean, Misery and Rain are kind of shit on, but they will get new characters as well. So Guy will always have a place for rushing the ults or giving them synergy power. I know I harped on him a lot when he originally came out, calling him very hyper-limited because of his kit. Only giving space and wind allies ult, and then giving Exalted Champions and Primal Demons the synergy power. They're very cheap buffs. They're very, very cheap. If they were like 55 cost skills, then he would be probably like down here or something like that. But I'm gonna put him in really good for now, because he can buff where is he? New Diablo, new Blanc, Space Jean. He could buff new Milim, New Year's Blessing Milim. He can give Primal Demons and Exalted Champions, which has quite a few characters. They can give them synergy power. So I think I'm planning for him in the future to stay in this tier. If not, then he easily drops down into A tier. Decent but limited, because he is limited. But right now, with the cast of characters we have, and knowledge that we're going to continue to get Blanc and Jean's, I think he's gonna stay in really good. But we'll revisit him in a few months and see if that's actually true, and maybe then drop him down to A tier. Next is Rimuru. He's not really doing anything super great, but he's not doing anything super bad either. So I mean, he's decent, but limited, hedging on really good. And I know people are gonna flame me for that, because you're like, don't summon for him because he's stupid. It's like, well, I mean, if you look at him objectively, like the attack buff, his 70% is worse than Space Rimuru's skill fusion as far as pure damage support. His ult conversion into rainbows is cool and everything, but you can only use it once. And meanwhile, Overlord Shizu exists, right? Regardless of if you have them or not, objectively speaking, you put them side by side. Who am I going to use more? I'm going to use goddamn Shizu. So Rimuru is basic to a fault. And, I just don't really understand why they made him so bland. But I do, because this is, the 2.5 anniversary. They expect a lot of new players to come in. They don't expect people to have Space Rimuru skill fuse. They won't have Overlord Shizu. And so then you're like, oh yeah, okay, he's a solid option, except he's on a single unit banner, which drops his value immensely. So I'm gonna put him in decent but limited for now. And then we can also revisit him, and maybe I just flip-flop him and Guy and call it a day in 2 months' time. right now I'm not overly impressed by Rimuru. He is generically good on almost any team, so I mean, there are people that are going to want him up here. And you know what? That is also an argument that I can entertain. But personally, and because it's my tier list and it's subjective, I don't really care for him. So, but again, we can revisit him, and you can let me know in the comments how you really feel about this Rimuru. I know some people already have let me know, and that's totally fine. You know, you're allowed to have opinions. Speaking of opinions, the Masked Hero. We all have opinions on the Masked Hero, right? She is a triple orb stealer. She gives the AoE skill. And I have stated many, many times now that the AoE skill is mostly unnecessary. It's cool. It makes her really good in Valor Cup to just clear mobs and clear like normal Valor Cup teams in like 2 turns, which is great because I don't have to spend time in normal Valor Cup, which I find horribly boring. Outside of that, AoEs are not super necessary, but the triple orb steal puts her onto the same level that Bride Shuna and Swimsuit Hinata have. Why? Because we only use Hinata and Shuna for the triple orb steal. Their first skills are practically irrelevant, which means that the hero should be graded the same way too, where she's used for a triple orb steal, and her first skill is pretty irrelevant. So she's great on most teams. Why? Because she can triple orb steal, and she can eliminate a lot of RNG. Now, does that save her from being on a single featured unit banner currently right now? Not really, because there's just no value there when you have a triple featured unit banner right next to them, like this. But Rimuru and the hero being here by themselves with nothing else, it really does not give them a good case. But the hero, objectively, is just as good as these two for what we want them to do. Hinata can give crits. Okay, cool. Do I ever do it? No. Shuna, she can give herself crit damage and light attack. Do I ever use it? I do it in Tower of Isis. Sure, fine, because I use a light magic team. That's cool. Outside of that, I never use it. And the hero, I expect to do the same thing, where if I need a triple orb stealer, I'll use her. And if I need an AoE skill, yeah, sure, fine, whatever. I don't see myself doing it, but she exists in the double S grade on most teams tier because she does the same thing that these two do. And it's not fair to put her down just because I don't like her AoE skill when objectively she is the same. So, those are my rankings for the Exalted Champions meta May of 2024. As always, let me know in the comments how you feel about these placements. I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for Rimuru, and I'm also going to get a lot of hate for placing the hero so very high. So be it. I'm ready for it. It's the internet. Everybody's mean on the internet. So let me know, but that's it for me, guys. Take it easy, and I'll see you all later.